My surgery I waited alone at the hospital. My son never showed up, so I canceled. The $1.70 medical trust that was supposed to secure his future, he didn't even know I could. I sat alone in the hospital's waiting room, clutching a crisp paper gown and a blue ice pack pressed against my hip where the surgeon had cautioned me not to shift, and everything around me pulsed with life. I no longer felt part of. Families clustered in soft circles, arms enfolding children, husbands offering coffee, laughter rising like light behind the frosted glass. Their warmth radiated through the pale chairs and into the fluorescent hum above, carrying a familiarity I no longer recognized. Then my phone buzzed twice, insisting that reality would not wait for healing. A single rose petal, dislodged from a bouquet someone must have brought into the hallway, fluttered down to rest on my gown. I reached for it then, fragile and unexpected, a reminder that beauty can survive even abandonment. I stared at the screen when I unlocked it. The message from Carl read, "Don't expect me to babysit an old bill. Sign the trust transfer and stop pretending anyone wants you around." The words burned down the corners of my heart. I pressed my palm to my mouth so I would not cry in front of strangers, and my thumb hovered over the message, but I could not bring myself to delete it. Around me, a child leaned into her father's shoulder. A man wiped tears from his wife's cheek, and I realized that love had become something I could observe but not inhabit. I closed my eyes, seeking comfort in remembering how his small hand once fit into mine. The hospital clock ticked mercilessly as I blinked against the ache in my chest, realizing that after everything I had given, I was now being charged rent for my own emptiness. I folded the phone closed, its face dark and accusing, and tucked it into the hospital gown's pocket. My hands were cold and steady, yet my heart was a hollow drum. I breathed in the scent of antiseptic and cotton, the sterile promise of recovery, but all I felt was the weight of abandonment settling like a shadow across the seat next to mine. I sat up straighter, willing myself to hold on to the thin line of dignity that had not yet slipped entirely away, and I waited, though I did not know for what or if anything would ever wait for me again. I remember the morning I walked into the jeweler's shop with my wedding band wrapped in a handkerchief. It was a modest ring, gold, worn thin from years of washing dishes and holding sick hands, but it still held the glint of a promise once whispered beneath a magnolia tree. I placed it gently on the counter, asked for what I thought would cover Carl's wedding deposit, and the clerk nodded solemnly. I did not tell Carl where the money came from. I did not want thanks. I only wanted him to begin his life without debt. I remember sitting in the back pew at his wedding, wearing a department store dress I had found on clearance, a soft beige thing that fit well enough if I kept my shoulders back. The lace itched, and I had sewn the hem myself the night before. When Carl saw me, he turned to his best man and whispered, not low enough, "You embarrass me showing up in that cheap dress." The words clung to me the whole ceremony, heavier than the borrowed necklace around my throat. After my husband died, I kept the house. It was a small place on the edge of town, with cracked shutters and a climbing rosebush he had planted the week we moved in. I trimmed those roses every spring, tucked away his gardening gloves like a relic. Carl came to visit once and stood in the kitchen with a curled lip. "This dump smells like poverty," he muttered. His wife laughed behind her glass of almond milk and nodded toward the creaking ceiling fan. "You know, if we bulldozed this place and built fresh, you could finally stop living like a ghost." But weeks later, I saw their social media post, an entire photo shoot in my backyard, staged like a vintage countryside escape. The roses framed their smiles. They had hired a crew to arrange wildflowers in my chipped watering can and called it rustic elegance. The caption read, "Simple living with elevated charm." I stared at the screen, wondering when the past became fashionable only if it came without the person who lived it. I lived simply because I had no choice. I clipped coupons, reused aluminum foil, patched socks instead of buying new ones. I bought generic everything and kept the thermostat at 65 in winter. Over the years I saved, quietly, steadily. I built up an account of $1,700,000, 0 cents, not from luxury, but from sacrifice. I never spoke of it. I did not think it needed to be spoken. Then one night, after Carl and his wife came back from a weekend at a wine resort, he sat at my kitchen table and said, "You are so cheap it is disgusting. Embarrassing, really." He spat the words like sour milk. I blinked, confused, then angry, then nothing. I stirred the soup in silence and wondered when love had become so easily displaced by convenience. The final cut came months later. Carl called to ask if I would co-sign a loan for a cryptocurrency investment he swore was the next big thing. I hesitated. I told him I did not understand crypto, that it made me nervous. He exploded. "You are so behind, so useless. Honestly, it is like you are stuck in the 1960s. I apologized. I always apologized, as if my discomfort was something shameful. After we hung up, I stared at the wall where my husband's medals had once been, and I thought, I would rather be outdated than ashamed of what I built. Carl never mentioned the loan again. But 2 weeks later, I saw a photo of them posing beside a Tesla, captioned, "Investing in our future, without dead weight." I used to think time healed all wounds, but the truth is, time only buries the wounds if no one keeps digging them up. My sacrifices became invisible the moment they no longer served their narrative. I gave my ring, my house, my warmth, my silence. And what I received was dismissal, derision, disapproval. I did not want applause. I only wanted my dignity intact. There was no apology when Carl used my house for his brand aesthetic. No gratitude when I emptied my savings to pay his student loans during the recession. No pause when he used my pantry like a backup grocery store during the pandemic. What there was, always, was judgment. If I asked for help, I was a burden. If I stayed quiet, I was cold. If I gave, it was never enough. If I refused, I was the villain. And so I watched, over and over, as they praised themselves for values they condemned in me. Her mother was independent for saying no. I was difficult. Their friend who saved money was wise. I was a miser. Their minimalist kitchen was chic. Mine was bare. Even their grandma aesthetic. Pinterest board featured images stolen from my life. The tablecloth I had sewn from scraps. The teacups I inherited from my aunt. The frayed armchair I could not afford to reupholster. And yet, I was never invited into the frame. I once believed that loyalty would earn me respect, that if I did the right thing quietly, the world would meet me with gentleness. But respect is not always the reward for doing right. Sometimes the world only claps for those who shout. And I was too busy whispering comfort into other people's pain to hear the sound of my own. Now, sitting alone with that text message heavy in my phone, the images came flooding back. My husband's gentle hands placing that ring on my finger, the way the roses looked when they bloomed after a hard winter, the way I counted pennies so Carl could have what I never did, the long hours I spent learning to stretch $1 so his future could stretch wide. None of it earned me a place in his world. Only the parts of me he could profit from mattered. The rest? Embarrassing, cheap, hysterical, useless. But I remembered everything. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above me, a steady, uncaring rhythm that matched the beeping monitors to my left. My hospital bed creaked whenever I shifted, the thin blanket offering little comfort against the chill that settled deep in my bones. A nurse passed by, smiling politely as she adjusted my IV line. She asked gently, "Would you like some water?" I nodded, whispering a thank you I was not sure she heard. Minutes later, a doctor stepped in, young and clean-shaven, clipboard in hand. He scanned my chart, his tone casual. "Recovery's going smoothly, vitals are good. Do you have any family coming by?" I looked at him, held his gaze a moment longer than I should have, then let a dry chuckle slip past my lips. "No," I said. "Just me." He nodded too quickly and made a note. He did not ask again. On the other side of the thin curtain dividing the room, voices swelled with laughter and warmth. A young woman giggled, a man's voice answered with soft teasing, and the squeak of chairs and clinking of gift bags filled the space. The scent of flowers drifted through. Peonies, maybe lilies, carried in by a family that had gathered, eager, affectionate. I caught pieces of their joy like shards through glass. "We brought your favorite soup. You look stronger already. We missed you so much." Then the rustling of wrappers, the untying of ribbons, the hush of a kiss on the forehead. The woman's IV beeped with the same rhythm as mine, yet her world was wrapped in celebration. Mine was sealed in silence. I turned toward the window, even though the blinds were shut tight. The reflection staring back at me in the darkened screen looked unfamiliar. Cheeks sunken, skin pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I adjusted the old handkerchief I kept clutched in my lap, smoothing it with trembling fingers. The stitching had worn down after years of use, fraying at the edges, but it still smelled faintly of lavender, the way my linen closet used to. It was the only thing I brought with me. No cards, no visitors, no fruit baskets with satin bows, just that handkerchief, and the echo of a voice I no longer heard calling my name with love. I had prepared for the surgery with quiet efficiency, setting aside enough for the copay, arranging a ride from a neighbor who could not stay, placing frozen casseroles in the freezer for when I got home. There had been no one to update, no one to hold my coat, no one to kiss my temple and whisper, "I will be here when you wake up." I did not expect otherwise. I had learned long ago that expectation was the birthplace of hurt. The hours crawled. Nurses rotated shifts, machines blinked steadily, and meals came in on plastic trays. I ate in silence, tasting little. My body ached from the incision, but my heart ached worse from the absence. Even the cleaning staff smiled and asked, "No one coming today?" as they emptied my trash and wiped down the bedside table. I smiled in return, always smiling, always polite. It was easier to mask the hollowness than to explain it. Late one afternoon, I shuffled slowly with my walker down the hallway, past patient rooms filled with color and life. Balloons tied to chairs, family photos taped to walls, children perched on windowsills holding stuffed animals. I passed a room where a man lay snoring, while two teenagers argued playfully over which movie to put on. I paused at the end of the hall, out of breath, and sat on a bench beneath a potted fern. A volunteer approached me and asked if I needed help calling anyone. I shook my head. She asked again, "No children? Grandkids?" I lied. I said they were busy, out of town. She smiled kindly, but looked away too quickly. Back in my room, I clutched that handkerchief again. I tried to remember the last time someone held my hand not out of duty, but out of affection. Maybe when Carl was 8 and frightened of thunder, and I climbed into his bed to whisper stories about brave sailors and golden islands. Maybe when my husband, still strong then, had reached across the table just to squeeze my fingers mid-sentence. That was long ago. The kind of long that settles into your bones and becomes indistinguishable from pain. I watched the clock tick past visiting hours. I watched the sun set in slanted golden beams across the floor. I watched my reflection again and saw the outline of someone who had never asked for much and received even less. There was a bitterness in the back of my throat I could not swallow, not from resentment, but from the quiet realization that I had been erased, not with cruelty, but with convenience. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift. I thought of how, when I was younger, the house was always full, of noise, of errands, of socks on the floor and burnt toast and slammed doors. I used to dream of peace. And now, here I was, cloaked in it, drowning in it. Peace without love is a prison. Silence without care is exile. And I had been sentenced not for crime, but for aging, for no longer being necessary. The nurse came by one last time that evening, checked my vitals, fluffed my pillow. She paused and said, "If you ever want someone to talk to, I am off shift at 10. I nodded, thanked her, and watched her go. I did not want to talk. What could I say? That a lifetime of giving had led to a room full of nothing? That even after surviving surgery, I felt more hollow than healed? I turned off the bedside lamp and lay in the dark. The hallway lights streamed in under the door like broken promises. From the next room, I could still hear laughter, the soft rustle of bedtime hugs, the goodnights exchanged freely. And then silence. But not the kind that comforted, the kind that echoed like an empty church. I curled around the handkerchief like a child, clutching the last thing she has. It smelled like old comfort and forgotten days. I did not cry. There were no tears left. Just a stillness so deep it felt like sinking. They arrived together, a flicker of sunlight through the blinds, revealing their silhouettes in the doorway. Carl, his posture rigid as a statue, and his wife, those sharp eyes scanning the room. Behind them came a notary, her clipboard stiff, her expression polite in the way almost always meant pity. I had propped myself up on the pillows, the incision aching, my throat raw from holding back the tremor that was always one trembling breath away. The notary introduced herself. "I am here to witness your signature on a trust transfer document." Her voice was calm, rehearsed, but I heard the predator's ease in it. The silence that followed was an invitation. Carl stepped forward, phone positioned on the bedside table, camera glaring at me like unfair lights on a stage I never auditioned for. He cleared his throat, and his voice echoed. "Watch this, my hag of a mom still thinks she has a choice." The word hag broke over me like glass shards against my ribs. I felt nothing. My heart went numb, but my face stayed still. His wife leaned across the dresser and pressed a cold legal pad toward me, pen poised. She whispered without kindness, "If she does not sign tonight, we will just put her in a nursing home. They will medicate her until she forgets the PIN." The word PIN sounded clinical, unfeeling, as though she spoke of a code to lock me out before I could even become a shadow of strength. I stared at the pen as though it were a snake curled on paper, poison ready to slide through the ink. Carl's camera light flickered, capturing my face, my silence, my helplessness. He said, quietly, "You are alive only because the bank still needs your signature. After that, crawl into your coffin." As the words fell useless out of his mouth, I realized I was being coerced into signing away my home, my freedom, my dignity. The notary opened the trust document and read the terms. The house, savings, and every asset funneled into their names. My name was a line at the bottom. They had me hostage with my own life's work. I felt the strength drain away, exhaustion pooling in the bones of my fingers. I let my eyelids fall halfway, the corner of my lips soft in a false surrender, a frailty I could pretend more convincingly than fear. If I looked helpless enough, perhaps they would relax and make a mistake. Carl frowned as though detecting the subtle shift. The camera clicked record on his phone. He squared his shoulders as he pressed the pen into my hand. The notary watched me with faint, awkward pity. His wife tapped her foot with a brittle grace. I held the pen with the tenderness I used to hold a newborn child, trembling with hope. I knew in that suspended moment that I could sign, and everything would be gone. But if they allowed me to sign willingly, they would lose the spectacle. They wanted my fear. They wanted control. I closed my eyes and breathed. Then I wrote one small word, "No." On the signature line, I wrote, "No." Silence. The camera's light blinked and died as Carl's fingers left the bedside table. His face, so swollen with anger, paled. The notary frowned, the document trembling in her lap. His wife's eyes widened, hate flickering like a broken flame. The room shuddered with their shock. The old woman dared to say no. I did not speak. I simply set the pen down, letter side up. I stared at them as though I held a mirror, as though my refusal was water revealing their own ugliness. Carl lunged forward, reckless anger pushing him into the space between us. "You think that means anything?" he spat. "You are nothing." I remained seated. "No," I said again. Not fear, not submission, just plain refusal. His wife turned on her heel. I heard the notary shuffle her papers, deadened grief in every crease of her face. Carl stumbled forward to the door, yanked the camera upright. The screen caught me in profile, delicate and broken but unbowed. They stormed out. The door clicked shut. I lay back, staring at the ceiling. The handkerchief, still in its place, suddenly felt heavier than my heart. The notary was sliding the pen back into her packet when a sharp voice crackled over the hospital intercom. A security guard stomped into the room behind her, pulling out a handheld device that blinked red. The display lit up with bold letters. Flagged. Attempted signature on protected asset. Elder financial abuse alert. Compliance team en route. Time froze inside that moment. The air turned brittle, and the smug satisfaction on Carl's face flickered. A dozen footsteps thundered down the corridor, and hospital security charged in, alert, upright, professional. At their side came a woman in a crisp suit and polished shoes, her ID revealing she was a regional representative from the bank where my account was held. The notary's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The camera on Carl's table, which he had intended to record my defeat, now seemed pointless. The live stream died in his hand. The security guard cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we are here to secure any documents and evidence. You are not under obligation to sign anything at this moment." The bank representative stepped forward, flipping through a tablet. We have protocols under state whole laws and federal regulations that allow us to intercept suspicious attempts to transfer protected assets, she explained. Ellie's hands clenched around the blanket. A surge of disbelief and relief washed over me. The law had stepped into the room. I sat up straighter, the incision pain momentarily forgotten in the strength of the moment. I looked, not at them, but at the papers still lying there. I cleared my throat, soft but steady. I signed a safeguard clause, I said, voice quiet but clear. Every attempt to force my signature is criminal evidence. I lifted the document with trembling fingers. The trust transfer glared back like a betrayal. This clause was drafted by an elder law attorney. It explicitly bars any coerced documentation from being legally valid, and it triggers procedures that hold perpetrators accountable. The bank rep nodded, consulting her tablet like a shield of authority. Carl's mouth hung open. His wife's color turned ashen. The notary retreated, her pen slipping from her grasp, clattering onto the floor. The visitors withdrew, shuffling, confused, powerless. Carl erupted in fury. His voice cracked. "You scheming witch!" The words slapped the air and fell flat against the cold logic of law and regulation. I met his gaze without blinking. "No," I answered. "I am just awake now." The words floated between us with calm finality. The security guard gently gathered the documents, the trust form, the pen, even the live stream phone. He pocketed them as evidence, protecting me from their intent. The bank rep placed her hand on my shoulder, a small gesture of solidarity. Carl glared. His frustration radiated, but he did not move to argue. The power had shifted too completely. They left. The door clicked shut. Silence filled the room again, this time not hollow, but heavy with consequence. I leaned back, breathing in and out slowly. The weight on my heart lifted slightly, replaced with something like peace. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady beep of my monitor, the quiet patter of caretakers in the hallway. Outside, the world moved on, except for me, who had rediscovered control at the moment they tried to take it away. They returned late that afternoon, silent as vultures disguised as family. I was resting, curtains drawn, when Carl's voice came over, calm but hollow. "You are signing another thing." I opened my eyes. They stood in the doorway, flanked by a second attorney I had not seen before, dark-suited and serious. Carl held a tablet. His wife had that cold expression, as though she'd already won. The attorney scanned the room and spoke slowly. "Mrs. Ellie, before we can proceed, I must disclose something." My heart clenched. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "You acquired the mortgage on the house years ago, during that market crash. Your son and daughter-in-law transferred ownership to themselves to play with high-risk cryptocurrency investments. You effectively became the lender for your own home." I frowned uncertainly. "Yes," I said softly. "I bought the note, so they would not lose everything." My voice cracked. He nodded. "Because the crypto venture collapsed and their account has been frozen due to suspected fraud, the mortgage they owed you is now in default." Carl scoffed. "So what? We still live here. You want to confiscate your own granddaughter's birthday cake location?" The attorney held up a decency escrow agreement and placed it on my bedspread, pristine and void of ink. "This provision activates legally under these circumstances. The house will remain with them, conditional, but only if they fulfill the terms." I leaned forward, weak but attentive. The attorney continued. 300 hours of community service in the geriatric ward. 12 sessions of behavioral therapy with a licensed counselor. Written apology letters to every patient or family member they demeaned or disrespected in this hospital or elsewhere. And public renunciation of any future claim on your trust or estate. A hush engulfed me. The terms shimmered with justice. My mind raced. They wanted a shortcut, and the law was offering them a detour. Public humility for private gain. Carl laughed, a cruel, echoing caw. "We won't scrub floors for a bunch of fossils," he spat, the word fossils sharp against my skin. His wife nodded, arms crossed. Even the attorney's eyes tightened with frustration. I turned to them, my voice steady. "You have a choice. The house stays, or you ignore it, decline accountability, and you lose it. I make the call, not the bank, not your creditors." They looked at each other. Fear, shame, calculation flickering. The camera Carl still held dropped to the floor, forgotten. I lay back, watching as the power shifted. The attorney gathered his papers. "The agreement stands, Mrs. Ellie," he said, voice neutral. "We will let you decide when you are ready." They left. The room was still. I held that paper in trembling fingers. A legal trap disguised as compassion. A test. A reckoning. I exhaled long and smooth. All the way through their avarice and mockery, I remembered why I did it. The roses I planted, the meals I cooked, the dreams I financed. Not for recognition, but for love. Now love had help, and I just woke enough to demand it be returned with honesty. 30 days passed, 30 days of silence, of forgetting, of waiting, and then the letter came. Foreclosure sale scheduled. The house, once a sanctuary I'd fought so hard to protect, had been seized. The bank moved swiftly. I learned it was sold at auction, no fanfare, just a hammer's dull finality. The winning bidder wasn't a faceless investor. It was a non-profit alliance dedicated to senior support and single mothers in crisis. My home would become a transitional center for elders and struggling mothers, a place of refuge rather than ruination. I looked at the walls around me, still marked by years of memory, the faded wallpaper, the rose-scented entryway, the creak in the floorboard Carl surprised me with on my 75th birthday, and felt an odd calm. The house would live on, serving those it had once sheltered. That quiet transformation felt more redemptive than all the court battles in the world. A week later, the courthouse was packed. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair and compassion in her eyes, looked over the gallery, then at me, then at Carl and his wife, who stood behind their attorney. The bank had arranged to play the video of my will, the one I recorded quietly at home, laying everything bare. The messages, the insults, the live stream, the betrayal. The room was wrapped as my voice echoed inside. "I do not leave this house to earn your gratitude. I leave it because it belongs where hearts can flourish. If you cannot respect that, then let it serve others who deserve dignity." The screen faded. A hush, thick and alive, settled. Then came the most unexpected voice of all. My granddaughter, little Ellie, tugged on the judge's robe. She looked at the gallery, then to me, then to her father. With the simple clarity of a child, she said, "Grandma waited for you in the hospital. You never came." That sentence shattered the courtroom. Eyes darted. My son's head dropped, shame blooming in his cheeks. His wife gasped. Everyone stared at him, not with ridicule, but with sorrow. The judge dabbed her eyes and nodded. "This court acknowledges much was lost. The house will now operate as the Redwood Transitional Center, serving seniors and single mothers. Mrs. Ellie's gift, the house, the garden, the story, will live on with purpose." More than half the room stood and applauded. I sat quietly, tears pressed behind my lids, held in line by the weight of this moment. On my granddaughter's behalf, on behalf of truth and compassion, Carl remained silent. I wondered if he was thinking of the bed he forced me to lie in alone, the apologies never made, the legacy he tried to erase. Then the judge paused again and said something I had not expected. "And as for this court, let it be known. A home built from love cannot be destroyed by greed." The gavel sounded. Out in the hallway, the nonprofit's director handed me a bouquet of daisies. A simple, cheerful gift. "Your home will help real people find a home," she said softly. "Thank you." I looked at my granddaughter, her small hand clutching mine, and felt peace. The house would breathe again. I walked out under the sunlight, feeling the weight of years still in my bones, but in my heart a new foundation settled. Hope built not on what was taken, but on what I gave away in grace. In a courtroom quiet as a winter dusk, the judge read the sentences. My son Carl received a suspended sentence and was ordered to perform 200 hours of community service. His first task, working in geriatric care, serving meals, learning dignity in each tray he passed. The charge? Attempted financial elder abuse. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was found liable in civil court, stripped of guardianship, prohibited from caring for my granddaughter. The small crowd in court watched as the weight of their actions began to fracture. I stood then, beside the judge's bench, braced by my attorney and my granddaughter's hand, holding tight. My voice felt steady when the judge asked if I wished to speak. I said, What was taken from me was not erased. What was withheld is still mine to give. And with that, the judge awarded me legal guardianship of my granddaughter, granting the child a safe harbor with a heart that had endured time. Later, the $1,700,000 0 cents I had quietly saved, loans, retirement accounts, pennies folded meticulously, was redirected. Established as the Ellie Watson Medical Scholarship Fund, it would support young students entering medical school who pledged to serve underserved communities, with priority given to seniors and single mothers, the very people who had once stood in solidarity with me. The estate, the house I once lost and feared missing forever, had found new life. The nonprofit had transformed our old Roses and Chintz home into the Redwood Transitional Center, a place where elders found compassion and single mothers found guidance. On ribbon-cutting day, the front yard was filled with neighbors, volunteers, and press photographers capturing the moment. I stood in the doorway, the morning sun playing on the rose trellis overhead. With scissors in hand, I cut the ribbon and opened the doors not with a speech, but with silence full of remembrance. Later, as guests entered and the roses stirred in the breeze, I walked into what was once my backyard garden. My granddaughter skipping ahead, her giggle was the kind of light that fills corners. I sank onto the stone bench beneath the climbing roses, their petals blush pink and trembling on the vine. Leaning down, I whispered to them, sparse words that felt complete in that moment. In the hours you left me alone, others stayed. The roses nodded, the sun glinted off their petals. It was a story that did not end with sorrow, but with the promise of redemption and care. Around me, the new center hummed with life, voices exchanging hope, lunch trays passed with warmth, children's laughter echoing. Elders traced their fingers along the garden wall. I closed my eyes and breathed. The whispers of gratitude, the rustle of healing, the soft clink of compassion, all of it wound around me like a quilt. I had given a home, and it had returned souls. People may forget sacrifice, but justice remembers where compassion blooms. After the opening, the crowds faded, but for me, each step forward was another layer of healing, not just loss. I spent mornings at Redwood Transitional Center greeting elders and young mothers, the scent of roses framing every corridor. My medical scholarship blossomed too. Letters arrived from students across the state, future doctors pledging service to rural clinics and senior communities, sending me hand-drawn thank you notes and photos of themselves in scrubs, with eager smiles. I framed one, a young woman with kind eyes holding a stethoscope, on the wall above my old writing desk in my new small home in Flagstaff. The world had turned, and I moved with it, not as a relic, but as a current. On a bright morning in early spring, I stepped into an auditorium full of nursing students to speak. I began simply. I started with nothing more than my voice, and tonight I give you back my hope. Their applause was gentle, and their tears mirrored mine. I realized then that my story had grown beyond personal victory. It was part of something broader, the gentle power of justice, love, and redemption. I spoke of silence and forgiveness, of boundaries and dignity, and of how sometimes the strongest healing happens not by reclaiming what was taken, but by offering it to others. That afternoon, a local magazine came to interview me under the roses. Their headline read, "Ellie, the grandmother who rose again, a story of justice, roses, and renewal." They asked about guilt, forgiveness, legacy. I told them, I am not defined by the cruelty placed upon me, but by every time my heart chose to keep serving. I planted roses, hoping someone might smell them someday, and the photo captured me with the sunlight in my hair and petals falling like a promise. Summer arrived, and one afternoon I hosted a community gathering in the garden that once was my private sanctuary. Volunteers, friends from the center, scholarship students, neighbors, and even some of the staff who had once cared for me in the hospital came. Together, we planted a circle of rose bushes around the old stone bench, each bush representing a person whose life had changed. As we dug, someone laughed about how roses always come back stronger after being pruned. I leaned on my walking stick, feeling the soil between my gloved fingers, and thought, yes, I did too. My granddaughter grew up quickly. She came for visits, helping me tend the garden, giggling when petals fell on her hair. Once, she tugged my sleeve and asked, "Grandma, do you still love Daddy?" I paused, the sun on my shoulders. I said softly, "I always will, but love builds you, and sometimes a child must learn love's strength on their own." She thought that over and nodded. It wasn't a closing, but a circle. On my 82nd birthday, I sat beneath the roses with a slice of cake and watched as scholarship recipients, staff, elders, and mothers gathered around me. Candles flickered in tall glasses, laughter branching out like petals. Someone raised a toast. To Ellie, who stood when she could have fallen, who saved a house with silence, but gifted the world with compassion. I closed my eyes, breathing in the evening air heavy with rose scent and human warmth, feeling applause as a slow current washing peace into me. Months passed, seasons turned, and each time I walked through those corridors, or read a thank you letter from a scholarship student, or saw my granddaughter blossom into kindness, I heard that old whisper behind my breath. Others stayed, and the roses nodded. Their petals glowed with what had been restored. In the end, there was no grand declaration, just the quiet certainty that I had reclaimed every inch of my life, through service, honor, and growing beauty. The world knew my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that even after betrayal and exile, a heart can still find its home, and love can be sown into every broken ground.